You're not lazy. Your brain is just following the path it's been trained to take. But what if I told you there's one simple daily action that can rewire that path for focus, consistency, and iron discipline? Discipline isn't a personality trait. It's not something reserved for elite athletes, Navy SEALs, or CEOs born with some rare inner fire. The truth is, discipline is a circuit in your brain, a physical, trainable loop made up of neurons, synapses, and neurotransmitters. Once you understand that, everything changes. You stop relying on motivation and start engineering behavior. At the center of this circuit is something called top-down control. It's governed by the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that plans, resists impulses, and delays gratification. This region is like the CEO of your brain. It sets goals and directs the rest of the system, but it doesn't operate in isolation. It needs repeated training, just like a muscle. Most people assume discipline comes from wanting it badly enough. That's flawed thinking. If that were true, no one would procrastinate. The real driver of discipline is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on behavior and repetition. Every time you resist a distraction and stay focused, you're not just making a choice, you're reinforcing a neural pathway. Do it enough times, and that pathway becomes the default. That's when action becomes automatic. That's when discipline starts to feel natural. Your brain also releases dopamine during this process, but not the kind that comes after rewards. It's anticipatory dopamine released in response to effort toward a meaningful goal. The more you engage in disciplined behavior, the more your brain starts associating action, not outcomes, with internal reward. That creates a feedback loop. Focus leads to dopamine, which fuels more focus. This is why the most disciplined people don't wait to feel motivated. They've trained their neural circuits to initiate behavior regardless of how they feel. It's not magic. It's not mindset. It's structure. And it's accessible to everyone. Even more powerful is that these circuits are malleable at any age. Whether you're 18 or 58, the brain retains its capacity for reorganization. The only requirement is consistency. A 2-minute daily protocol repeated with precision is enough to begin the restructuring. When you start viewing discipline as a set of trainable brain circuits, you take back control. You're no longer relying on willpower, which fluctuates. You're building a system that runs on biology, predictable, measurable, and adaptable. Discipline isn't who you are. It's what you train. The trick is a science-backed tool called visual anchoring. At first glance, it may seem too simple to be effective, but simplicity is often a sign of something deeply rooted in biology. Visual anchoring leverages the way your brain naturally prioritizes sensory information, specifically how the visual system drives focus, attention, and action readiness. Your eyes are not just passive receivers of light, they are part of your brain. In fact, two cranial nerves, the optic nerves, connect your eyes directly to your brain's visual cortex and influence several other regions involved in movement and decision-making. When you fix your gaze on a specific object, you're not just seeing, you're activating a cascade of neural events that enhance attention and suppress distraction. Visual anchoring works by creating a consistent cue that your brain learns to associate with disciplined behavior. When you select one unchanging point of focus, an object on your desk, a mark on the wall, or even a symbolic item you keep nearby, and train yourself to stare at it with intensity and intention, you create a neural link between that visual stimulus and a specific behavior or habit. Over time, this link becomes automatic. What's happening under the surface is that your brain begins to tie external focus, the visual anchor, to internal states, task initiation. You're literally using your visual system as a lever to engage the prefrontal cortex and suppress the limbic system, the part of the brain that seeks novelty, comfort, and quick rewards. You're telling your brain, when I see this, I begin. Neuroscience shows that sustained visual attention reduces activity in the default mode network, the system responsible for mind wandering and distraction. At the same time, it ramps up the task positive network, which is responsible for executing goal-directed behaviors. That shift is what allows you to transition from intention to action without the mental friction most people feel. Practicing visual anchoring, even for as little as 30 seconds daily, trains the brain to enter a state of readiness. You start to feel less resistance before doing hard tasks because your brain has already been cued to move. It becomes a conditioned response. See the anchor. Start the work. And this works regardless of mood, motivation, or how tired you feel because it's not emotional, it's structural. This method exploits your brain's top-down control to override distraction. Top-down control is a cognitive function where your brain's higher-order regions, especially the prefrontal cortex, guide your thoughts, behaviors, and actions based on internal goals, rather than reacting impulsively to what's happening around you. It's the mechanism that lets you stay focused on writing when your phone lights up with a message, or resist junk food when you're trying to eat clean. The ability to engage this control system on demand is what separates disciplined action from chaotic, distracted behavior. Distraction isn't just a bad habit, it's a neurological tug of war. Your limbic system constantly seeks immediate gratification, novelty, and comfort. It's evolution's way of helping you survive, but in a modern context, it becomes a liability. Social media, noise, overstimulation, these hijack the limbic system and fragment your focus. Top-down control is the override switch. It allows the prefrontal cortex to suppress limbic impulses and stay aligned with long-term goals. The beauty of visual anchoring is that it creates a reliable entry point into that override mechanism. When you train your brain to associate a fixed point of visual attention with a specific action, you're building a direct link to top-down engagement. Your brain starts to treat the anchor as a cue to quiet distractions and activate the task-positive network. It's not about forcing yourself to concentrate. It's about building a neural habit of shifting into focus mode. Over time, the connection between the anchor and your disciplined behavior becomes so robust that it bypasses the need for conscious effort. That's where the true power lies. Once the top-down circuitry is trained, it doesn't rely on motivation. It responds to structure, cue, and repetition. There's also a physiological element to this. Sustained visual focus has been shown to increase norepinephrine levels, a neurochemical that enhances alertness and task engagement. This primes your brain to stay locked in, making it less susceptible to interruption from internal chatter or external noise. By using visual anchoring, you're not just improving focus, you're reinforcing the neurological pathways that suppress reactivity and distraction. You're training your brain to act based on what you decide matters, not what temporarily stimulates it. And that, at a neurological level, is the foundation of true discipline. You can rewire your neural pathways for consistency through a daily 2-minute practice. That may sound too short to be meaningful, but in the context of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and change based on experience, precision, and repetition matter far more than duration. When the brain receives the same focused signal repeatedly, even for a short time, it begins to treat that signal as important and begins reinforcing the circuits associated with it. This is what makes the 2-minute visual anchoring technique so powerful. You're not trying to do more. You're trying to do something specific with intense focus on a consistent schedule. Neuroscience has shown that repeated brief episodes of high-intensity focus can create stronger and more lasting changes in the brain than longer, unfocused efforts. It's not about how long you train your attention, it's about how precisely and consistently you do it. During this 2-minute practice, you're strengthening the association between a visual anchor and a specific behavior. The brain responds to that pairing by increasing synaptic efficiency in the relevant pathways, particularly those connecting the visual cortex, prefrontal cortex, and motor planning areas. Over time, these connections become automatic. The brain starts to interpret the anchor not as a visual object, but as a trigger for a behavioral sequence. This is how habits are built on a neurological level. The 2-minute window also reduces resistance. Most people struggle to form new habits because the effort feels overwhelming. But asking your brain for just 2 minutes of intense, undistracted focus sidesteps that resistance entirely. It creates a low-friction entry point that's easy to commit to, and that small commitment is enough to begin structural brain changes, especially when it's repeated daily. Moreover, these small, consistent practices tap into the brain's reward prediction system. When you repeat an action reliably each day, the brain begins to anticipate it. This anticipation itself becomes a signal for dopamine release, reinforcing the behavior and building momentum. You begin to crave the act of consistency, not just the end result. That craving is what keeps the neural loop alive and growing stronger. So in 2 focused minutes a day, you're not just building a habit, you're building a new identity at the neurological level. One that acts with discipline not by force, but by default. Behavior change doesn't start with motivation. It starts with environment and focus. Most people wait to feel ready before they take action. They think they need to be in the right mindset, have a burst of inspiration, or feel emotionally charged to begin a new habit. But that's not how the brain works. In fact, motivation is one of the least reliable drivers of consistent behavior. It fluctuates based on mood, sleep, stress, and even blood sugar. If you rely on motivation to fuel your discipline, you're essentially gambling with your progress. What drives real, sustained behavior change is structure specifically, the environment you place yourself in, and the cues you surround yourself with. The brain is a pattern-detecting machine. It responds strongly to consistent signals in the environment. This is why visual anchoring is so effective. It turns a part of your physical space into a neurological cue. Over time, the brain doesn't just recognize that cue, it expects action to follow it. That's how environment shapes identity. But environment alone isn't enough. It must be paired with focus. Focus is the glue that binds intention to execution. When you place yourself in an environment free of distractions and lock your attention on a single object or task, you activate the brain's executive networks. These networks are designed to suppress background noise and bring goal-relevant information to the forefront. This state of focus is what initiates neuroplasticity. It tells the brain, this matters. Strengthen this connection. This is why short, structured moments of intense focus, repeated in a consistent environment, are more powerful than hours of distracted effort. You're training the brain to associate a physical location or a visual cue with a particular state of mind. Over time, entering that space or seeing that cue automatically triggers the behaviors you've been conditioning. And the process works in reverse, too. If your environment is chaotic, cluttered with distractions, or filled with temptation, your brain has to fight an uphill battle just to access focus. That's why willpower feels like a struggle. It's your brain trying to override an untrained environment. When you optimize your environment and direct your focus with precision, behavior change becomes frictionless. You're not pushing against resistance, you're aligning with the brain's natural wiring, and that's when consistency becomes effortless. Neuroplasticity is the mechanism. Precision and repetition are the levers. Everything you do, every behavior you repeat, every pattern you reinforce, it's all shaping your brain at a structural level. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change itself in response to experience. It's how we learn new skills, break bad habits, and build new ones. And contrary to old myths, this process doesn't stop in childhood. It's lifelong. The key is understanding how to activate it intentionally. For neuroplasticity to be engaged, 2 conditions must be met: focused attention and repeated exposure. The brain doesn't change just because you perform an action, It changes because it notices you're performing an action, and it sees a reason to adapt. That's where precision comes in. When you practice a behavior with clear intent, full focus, and defined boundaries, like linking a visual anchor to a specific daily task, you're sending a strong signal to your nervous system. This matters. The brain then prioritizes those synaptic pathways and starts reinforcing them. Repetition is what stabilizes the change. Each time you perform the same action in the same way, you're strengthening the myelination of the involved neural circuits. Myelin acts like insulation around nerve fibers, allowing electrical signals to travel faster and more reliably. This is how something that once felt effortful, like initiating deep work, exercising daily, or delaying gratification, eventually becomes second nature. The wiring changes. The resistance drops. But here's what most people get wrong. Repetition without precision creates noise, not improvement. If your practice is inconsistent or distracted, you're not reinforcing a clear signal. You're muddying the waters. That's why 2 minutes of sharply focused visual anchoring can be more effective than hours of half-hearted effort. The clarity of the signal is what the brain responds to, not the length of time. Also, neuroplasticity is not just cognitive, it's emotional. When you pair consistent behaviors with a sense of control, progress, or purpose, your brain begins to embed those behaviors into your self-identity. It's no longer something you're trying to do, becomes who you are. That shift isn't metaphorical. It's literal. It's neural. So when you harness neuroplasticity with precise, repeated action, you're not just changing your habits. You're restructuring the architecture of your brain. You're laying down the tracks for a more disciplined, focused, and high-performing version of yourself, one repetition at a time. If you're serious about mastering your mind, don't just watch, implement. Start with 2 minutes today. Subscribe for more science-backed tools that hardwire high performance into your brain, one habit at a time.